10 questions about the Murmillo, a type of gladiator in ancient Rome. Salvete, my name is Demetrios, I'm a historical reenactor and gladiator myself. I usually portray a provocator, but this time I'm gonna answer 10 questions about the Murmillo. Question number 1. What exactly is a Murmillo? The Murmillo is a heavy armored gladiatorial type that existed for a pretty long time and is one of the more recognizable types of gladiator that we know of. The Murmillo is a pretty cool, more defensive fighter because he was considered a heavy armored fighter. This is because of his shield, his helmet and the rest of the equipment. It was a tank in modern terms, a tank under gladiators. So the Murmillo was one of the earlier ones that evolved from other classes that existed earlier in the gladiatorial period. So the Murmillo didn't exist from the beginning. He came into existence after some time and then lasted until the very end of gladiatorial history. If you, for example, imagine what a gladiator would look like, most probably you would see something very similar to what a Murmillo would have looked like. A fighter with a shield that looks like a Roman legionary, not identical but very similar to the Roman or the classical Roman of the imperial time, for example. Question number 2. Why is he called Murmillo and what does that mean? As far as I know, the Murmillo has its name from a saltwater fish from the Mediterranean Sea that is called Murmillos or Myrmillos in Greek. I probably butchered that because I am not able to speak Greek or ancient Greek, but that's the origin of the name. The equipment of the Murmillo has some indications for that. For example, the helmet has a big crest, similar to the fin of a big fish. We also have some ancient sources citing or talking about the symbolism of this fish in regards or in combinations to the Murmillo as a gladiator. What is also important to note is that the Murmillo in the beginning was the counter or the partner, sparring or combat partner of the Retiarius, the net fighter. And the Retiarius, as a gladiator representing a fisherman with his trident and the net, represents the, let's call it, elemental or natural combat between the fisherman and the fish. So the Murmillo represents the fish and the Retiarius represents the fisherman, and it symbolizes the combat between the two. And that's where the name comes from the fish Myrmillos or Mormilos or Mormyros. I don't know how exactly it is pronounced, but that's the origin of the name for what we call Murmillo. Question number 3. How can I see or recognize a Murmillo at first glance? That's rather simple if you know what you have to look for. The Murmillo has the largest shield of every type of gladiator. It is pretty much the same size of a legionary shield. So it is a huge shield covering about every part of the body but the foot and the head. Then, in combination to that shield, he has a very, very large helmet. A helmet with a large brim, a very large crest, most often depicted with feathers. He has a short gladius in his right hand and a manica on his right arm and a protection for the left leg. So if you see a gladiator wearing a large helmet and a very large shield, most probably it is a Murmillo. Question number 4. What equipment does a Murmillo carry and what makes it unique? Well, the Murmillo is not that unique in the sense of equipment pieces, but in style of the equipment. I mean, a lot of gladiators are wearing a shield. The Murmillo just has the largest of them. A lot of gladiators have a helmet, but the Murmillo has the largest of those helmets. So if you see, like I said, a gladiator wearing large equipment pieces, most probably it's a Murmillo. But in detail, the shield of a Murmillo is rectangular and very big. From top to bottom, he has a very large helmet, a fully closed visor, a large brim around the helmet, a very large crest, and is often decorated. He has the manica on the right arm. Most depictions of Murmilli show maniche made out of fabric or leather. You very seldom, if any, see Murmilli wearing a metal manica. That's something for the secutores or for the retiarii. He has no protection for the upper bodies. He has no protection for the left arm. He has, like every gladiator, a subligaculum and a balteus, holding everything in place. And he has a padded shin guard, or tibiale, how we call it, plus a smaller ocrea made out of metal covering the shin of the fighter. He has no shoes. Most depictions of gladiators show them without shoes. And as a weapon, he's wearing or he's using a gladius. The gladi most probably are a bit longer compared to the gladius of a provocator, but we are not that sure, and it also depends on the time period we are talking about. The equipment evolved from another type of gladiator called the Samnite, which was an ethic class, which then over time was evolved in other types of classes because the Samnites were integrated into the Roman Empire and you didn't want to display them as a sort of enemy of the Romans because at that point they were Romans. Question number 5. Why did the Murmillo have such a large helmet? Well, we don't have a definite answer to that question, but most probably because he was symbolizing one of the two Roman fighters, the other one was the provocator, you wanted him to be recognizable in the arena, and having a very large shield makes it very easy for the public, for the viewers, for the spectators to see a Murmillo and recognize him as the Roman soldier or the Roman fighter in that specific duel. It gives also a very, very good protection if you have a full visor, a large helmet, large brim around. It is not always positive because regarding against who you fight, like for example the Hoplomachus, he can put his spear under the brim of the helmet and push back. But other than that, it's a very, very, very good defensive helmet to have. You have excellent vision because it is open in the sense that you have a lot of holes in the visor, so you can breathe a lot, you can see very good, or compared to other helmets like the Secutor, for example. What wasn't that good is the weight of the helmet, because having a very large helmet on your head is not that good for your spine or for your neck, so you wouldn't have the helmet on for extended periods of time. And that's important because a gladiatorial fight most probably was about a few minutes to max tops 10-15 minutes, but that's tops. Most likely a gladiatorial fight would have ended within 10 minutes of combat, including breaks, show, and whatnot. Also, what could be an interesting fact is that having large equipment on you makes you appear bigger. So it could be that in order to make the gladiators appear larger, because if you consider that you are sitting in an amphitheater about, 50 meters away from the actual fight, the farther away you sit, the smaller the people become in the distance, and having them wear large equipment could have been for the spectator to see them more easily from a distance. Question number 6. Who did the Murmillo usually fight against? And that's a cool question because the Murmillo, at least in my opinion, was some kind of a joker. You could pit him against probably most other gladiators, or at least most of the common ones. So, as I said, in the beginning, the Murmillo also faced the Retiarius. Later then came the Secutor, who was specialized with his equipment and fighting style against the Retiarius. He also fought against Provocatores. We have a relief depicting one of those fights. Even though it wasn't that common, they did. Murmilli also could face another Murmillo. So Murmillo against Murmillo, that could also happen. But the most common enemies or The most common opponents of the Murmillo were the Thraix or Thraixes and the Hoplomachus or Hoplomachi. These two types were primarily pitted against a Murmillo. You had the Thraix, which was the barbaric fighter from modern Bulgaria or Thracia, and you had the Hoplomachus representing most probably a Greek fighter, having a large round shield or a small round shield but having a spear, symbolizing like the hoplite fighting in a phalanx, just as one person fighting against the Murmillo. So you have a lot of potential enemies for the Murmillo. As I said, the Retiarius is a potential enemy or opponent. The Provocator is one. The Murmillo himself is one. You have the Thraix and you have the Hoplomachus, which makes them 5 enemies or 5 opponents you can pit against a Murmillo, which is a fairly large amount or large number of opponents you can put up against a Murmillo. There are other classes that have one class they fought against and no other, like the Secutor. Secutores fought against Retiari. I don't know of any instance where you see a Secutor fighting something different. And that's why I call the Murmillo some sort of joker, because you can pit him against a variety of other opponents or classes, which makes him pretty cool in the context of gladiatorial games, because if you have one and you have one of every other class, you can choose against which he has to fight. Question number 7. What is the typical fighting style of a Murmillo? The Murmillo, having a large helmet, a large shield and heavy equipment, is more on the defensive side of combat, meaning he is more likely to be stationary in place, waiting for an opportunity to counter an attack. For example, the fight against a Thraix looks very spectacular in the way that the Murmillo stands there and waits and gets attacked and blocks and gets attacked and then retaliates as soon as he finds an opening. The Thraix, on the other hand, jumps around, runs around the Murmillo in circles. He jump attacks, he can kick if he wants because it's the barbaric class. The Murmillo, on the other hand, is there defensive. He stands there, he awaits the opportunity to attack his opponent. With his large shield, he can either bash or block vision. Because if you put a large shield in front of the face of your opponent won't see a thing. That's impossible to see around that shield because it's just that big. So that's a possibility you can do or take. But the problem with that is the shield is very heavy. So doing that a lot of times costs you a lot of energy. Running around costs you a lot of energy because of the weight of your equipment. So you just don't want to do that, because if you don't have any energy left, the fight is over very fast and you don't want that. First of all, you want to win. So you stand there and you await the right moment, the right opportunity to retaliate and attack. And the Murmillo does that by hitting with the tip of his sword. So the Murmillo has a fighting style of a more defensive, more static combatant, waiting for the right opportunity to retaliate and to attack his opponent. It's not that spectacular in that sense, but on the other hand it is, because you see a human wearing lots of armor or heavy armor and being pretty flexible in the way he fights, which is pretty cool. Question number 8. Was the Murmillo considered strong, slow, or something else? Well, the Murmillo was often portrayed as a powerful and resilient gladiator type. He wasn't considered to be slow, but less agile as, for example, his opponents, the Hoplomachus or the Thraix or the Retiarius for that matter. But he was still mobile, he could still walk around or even run around. But the fighting style relied more on stamina and endurance and defense than attack and offense and running around in the arena. So he was considered to be a, like I said, static or defensive fighter waiting or awaiting the right opportunity to attack. Also, because he was a defensive and rather static fighter, he relied more on technique than on fancy or flashy moves or something. So he waited for the right moment to then attack. Question number 9. Were there any famous Murmilli we know of today? There is one Murmillo that we know by name. His name was Marcus Attilius. We know him from a graffito in Pompeii, depicting him as the winner of a combat against a much more experienced and seasoned fighter called Lucius Rhaecius Felix. We know that on that graffito is written that the latter had an impressive career before his defeat. He was defeated by Marcus Attilius, who wasn't that experienced. He was new into the scene, at least from what we know. He wasn't that experienced, but he won. And I think that maybe that made him famous, because he won against a much more experienced gladiator. We also know that the Lucius Rhaecius Felix didn't die, and later was granted his freedom. Most probably because he had a very impressive career, and he lost due to another gladiator who was very promising and potentially became a star in the gladiatorial world. But like it is with a lot of gladiators, there is so little evidence that we don't really know which gladiators were the famous ones and what classes they had. And question number 10. How accurate is the portrayal of Murmilli in today's reenactment scene? In reenactment, the class is portrayed very good. I mean, you have surviving equipment pieces of the Murmillo from Pompeii, for example. You have a lot of depictions of the Murmillo on gravestones, on reliefs, on mosaics. So to imitate the equipment is fairly easy. Even though the shield and the helmet are large and heavy, the equipment is rather basic. You have, like I said, shield, helmet, manica, tibiale, ocrea. And that's and the subligaculum, and that's it. You don't have any special equipment pieces that were solely used for the Murmillo. The depictions of the helmets are pretty good. We have a lot of different types of helmets. For example, the type Berlin or the Berlin, which is a large helmet with a large crest and a visor that is like this. You just put it on your head, that helmet. There isn't much else you have to do. We have other helmets surviving with other type of visor, other types of brims, other types of crests. The manica is pretty standard in most of the depictions. Like I said, most likely fabric or leather. And then we have the ocrea, which is rather small compared at least to the ocreae from the Thraexes or Hoplomachi, or for that matter also for the Provocator. It's a rather small one because your shield is that huge. You don't need a large shin protection, because even if you have the shield like here and you are standing in position, the lower edge of the shield still covers half of your shin. So there isn't need for a large metal piece to guard it. But from what I've seen so far from different schools, from different places in the world, Murmilli are depicted pretty good. And I like it to see them because I like the fighting style of the Murmillo. And I like to see the equipment because it resembles, like the Provocator, it resembles the Roman legionary. So these were the 10 questions for the Murmillo. I hope you liked it and you enjoyed it. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them down in the comments so I can probably answer them, or at least do the research to answer them. Make sure to like and subscribe. Tell me what you want to see next. I think the next classes I'm going to talk about are either the Traex or the Hoplomachus, depending on my mood or depending on what you want to see. And with that, I think that's all. That's a wrap. We'll see us next time. Valete!